What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts with Nick. A little different setting today. It's been super cold, so I figured get outside on this frozen lake. It's a little bit of a cool vista for the backdrop. Super windy, so I'm just hoping my tripod doesn't blow over. But anyway, we'll get into it with the quote. And today's quote comes from Max Planck, and what he said, this is kind of a loose translation and approximation, but what he said was, science advances one funeral at a time. And if you're not familiar with Max Planck, he was a famous German scientist. He did a bunch of different stuff, but one of the things that he's best known for, I guess you could say, is he's known as the father of quantum mechanics due to his work on black body radiation, which he determined that energy is released in discrete units which he called quanta, rather than, continuous, like one unit at a time per se. Look it up. That's the best explanation I can give. But anyway, yeah, that's Max Planck. And what he's getting at there is science is super dogmatic. The beliefs and belief systems are super entrenched. And even if you have kind of like a rigorous body of proof, if you're going against the current dogma, it's going to be really hard to overcome. All right, I called it. We're good. Anyway, if you're going against the current belief system, it's going to be really difficult to kind of establish credibility, so to speak. And a great example of this from like way back in the day is Galileo, his ideas, and which obviously were true, but he had to recant because he was in jail by the church, that kind of a thing. And it still persists to this day. So what Planck was saying is, until the old guard dies, the new ideas are going to be impossible to advance because they're held onto so firmly. They're grasping them too tight to give them up. And to give them up might be to concede that a lot of their life's work was wrong. So that's why they're hesitant to do so. But anyway, the reason why I chose that quote is because today I want to discuss a book, which I have right here, called The Body Electric by Robert Becker, MD. And within this book, Becker just talks about a ton of different things, specifically regarding electricity and how it interacts, affects, is a part of the human body and bodies of other creatures, living creatures. And it's just very contrary to popular belief. And, throughout the book, by the end of it, like he proves some really crazy, profound things that you would never expect. And by the end, he just was totally blackballed by the scientific community, the medical community as a whole, to the point where he got no more funding despite the, mass proof that he had of really revolutionary, groundbreaking information. And my goal here is simply to encourage some people, ideally, if I could get one single person to go out, purchase this book and read it for themselves, that'd be a win for me, because it was just so shocking. I learned so much. So what I want to do is just kind of give a quick overview of some of the things that I learned, and I'll explain it the best I can, but it would really be best for you to end up going and purchasing the book for yourself if you're interested in what I'm saying, because I can only do the explanation so well. I've only read this book once so far. I have a decent understanding of the material, but it's not ironclad. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. So, living creatures have semiconducting direct current running through their bodies, through their nervous system. A semiconducting current is a small current that can travel a large distance. And the electric potential of this current varies at different points throughout the body. So for human beings, for example, the electric potential is positive at the head, chest area, and pelvis region, but it's negative at, your extremities, your hands and your feet. And this varies for different animals, but that's how it works in humans. The electric potential varies throughout different points in the body for all animals. And there's kind of two. I wanted to preface by explaining the electrical component of bodies. First of all, because there's two main tenets of the book that I'm going to touch on. One of them being regeneration, and the second one, which I'll get to later, is kind of the harms and risks associated with electromagnetic fields and human exposure to them. So first of all, regeneration. What I mean by that is the capacity to regrow missing limbs, missing appendages. When something gets amputated, I'm scared this is going to fall over again. When something gets amputated, the ability, sliding away. We got it though. All right. Come on, man. All right, regeneration. So the simpler the life form, the better, or the simpler the life form, the more complete, I guess I should say. And for a long time, it was thought that regeneration could only be achieved fully in plants, not animals. And this was held on to until the 1740s, when there was a creature called a hydra that was discovered. And they didn't really know if it was a plant or an animal. It kind of like looks like your hand with waving fingers, so to speak, and it flips and flops around and grabs food with those tendril-like fingers. And what they discovered is they could chop off some of those tendrils and they would grow back totally entirely. They could chop the whole half of the hydra and it would grow back entirely. And they ended up discovering, by the way, this is like a super small creature. I don't know if it's microscopic, but it's real tiny. And they discovered they could shred it into like 50 different pieces, and each piece would grow back a fully realized hydra, which I felt was totally insane, because from one creature you end up getting 50. That's kind of mind-blowing. So anyway, 1740s, that's when they first realized animals have this capacity as well. And one of the animals that was experimented a lot on throughout the course of this book was salamanders. And salamanders are kind of like the highest life form that has a really high capacity, a really good capacity for regeneration. And they can regenerate like a full loss of limb, fully regrown. They can regenerate their eyeballs. They can recover greatly heart damage, which heart typically heart tissue doesn't recover its scars, but they're actually able to regrow their hearts, or grow them back together for that matter. So salamanders are really one of the highest life forms that displays regeneration in a great capacity. So they were experimented a lot on throughout the course of the book, and through electrical stimulation they were able to speed up the regeneration process of salamanders quite dramatically. Another species they experimented on a good amount was frogs. And frogs, they're able to achieve partial regeneration. So if you amputate a limb, they might be able to regrow, just, for example, to the elbow or something like that. They're not able to grow back the whole leg. But using electrical stimulation, they were able to actually induce full regeneration of limbs in frogs, like way beyond their natural innate capacity. And that right there is a revolution in itself. But the final piece that's really insane is rats. They were able to almost get rats to fully regrow amputated limbs. They would regrow full bones. Like, say they chopped off their arm, they would regrow this whole portion with bones and everything, but the hand, it was just cartilage. It didn't actually fully materialize into the individual bone structures for the wrists and fingers and everything. But just that in itself, they were able to induce, almost full limb regrowth in mammals. That just opens the door wide open for the possibility that it can be achieved in humans. But, no further research has really been done on that front. So in terms of human regeneration, there's only one way that we display that, which is bone healing. And when I say bone healing, technically it's not really bone healing, it's bone regeneration, because what's going on is, rather than the two ends of the fracture knitting themselves back together, the cells within the surrounding area go through a process called de-differentiation, which means they're specialized cells initially, and they go backwards into a more primitive, almost stem cell-like state in order to be reassigned, it's called metaplasia, but to undergo metaplasia in the future. So they go through this de-differentiation process back to a primitive state, and then they form caps on each end of the fractured bone, which is called a blastema. And then from there, they go through metaplasia and regenerate, create new bone. So that's the only capacity humans have for regeneration. Adult humans, that is. Kids, if you actually, I believe it's if you're under the age of 11, if you lose your finger, the tip of your finger above the first knuckle, it'll fully regrow, which is, I didn't know that. I thought that was insane. So anyway, de-differentiation and metaplasia, the cells go back, revert to a primitive state, and then develop into what's necessary for this bone regeneration. And it's just crazy. And it shows that we do have some level of regeneration. And if you could, find a way to kind of take that a step further with the electrical stimulation, you could probably induce limb healing. And they are actually able to speed up bone regeneration through electrical stimulation in humans. This is known, so we're receptive to this process. It's not just the other animals. We're susceptible to this too. So why they haven't continued to explore in this vein, I have no idea. This book was published originally in 1985. This is over 40 years old of research, and I haven't heard of any new developments in this field, which is fucking mind-boggling, because this is just, imagine the veterans who lose their arms, lose their legs in combat, or anyone else for that matter, but veterans is just the example that comes to mind, because it's just sad. It's really depressing. But they could potentially regrow their limbs, but no. I don't know. As you can tell, I think this should really be a priority. It should really be explored further, tested further by the medical and scientific community, but it hasn't been, and unfortunately, I kind of doubt that it will be. So, regeneration was kind of the first part and a major tenet of the book, and I really kind of just touched on a few brief parts of it. Hopefully that'll inspire you to end up purchasing it for yourself and explore that further, because there's so much more that I can't really explain properly regarding the regeneration. So now I want to get into the negatives, which I can explain a little better because it's kind of a little more intuitive. So in addition to the benefits that can be achieved through electrical stimulation, there's also quite a few negatives. And one right away is the potential amplification of existing tumors. It could stimulate their growth or malignant growths within the body, which obviously is pretty concerning. And that's why if we were to continue to try and apply this innovation to humans, it's extremely necessary to be as safe as possible and go through rigorous precautions to make sure we're not doing more harm than we are good. So that's something to be aware of. And another thing that's really disheartening or concerning in the world that we live in today is constant perpetual electromagnetic exposure is a really serious issue, because it induces a constant stress response for the body. The body's in a constant state of stress trying to respond to this external trigger. And what that does is it lessens the capability to respond to other threats. For example, infectious disease or something like that. You're not going to be as well prepared. Your immune system's not going to be as well prepared to fight it off, because you're already fighting this electromagnetic exposure that the body's not used to, that it doesn't know how to handle, and it's constant. And the really most concerning one is called extremely low frequency electromagnetic radiation, and I'm going to abbreviate that throughout this video to just ELF. It's the one that I'm going to be focusing on most. So extremely low frequency ELF, electromagnetic. And that is the most alarming because it approximates the dimensions of the Earth, which it has a dramatic effect on us. And that's another thing, unfortunately, I can't really explain fully. I wish I could, but I don't really understand what the dimensions of the Earth have to do, how they factor into this equation. But anyway, extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields impacted in rats impact norepinephrine levels, which is a hallmark of clinical depression. Man, this wind is killing me. And using suicide as the most extreme outcome of depression, the rate of suicides was compared between homes in close proximity to power lines and randomly selected addresses. And since there's a variety of other potentially interfering variables and factors, they actually used total field strength as a quantifiable measurement to kind of ground the experiment with value rather than just something abstract like proximity to, like I said. And what they discovered was, on average, electromagnetic fields were 22% higher at homes where suicides occurred, and the areas with the strongest fields had 40% more fatal locations than the randomly selected control groups. So, pairing what we know about the rats with the norepinephrine to the suicide information, it becomes pretty clear to me anyway that the electromagnetic fields and the field strength has a profound effect on depression. And I think that's something that people need to be aware of because of the rates of depression today. And like I said, it's not the only factor, it's not the only reason, but clearly it's a factor. So next, studying mice exposed to extremely low frequency compared to non-exposed control groups, the exposed groups required 1/5 or just 20% of the bacteria concentration required to kill mice in the control group. So going back to what I said regarding the immune response and the constant stress due to the perpetual ELF exposure, this is a great example of it. 20% of the bacteria was necessary to kill the rats compared to the control groups. That's shocking. That's major. That's dramatic. So next, when examining certain childhood cancers, the victim was paired with the next baby born in the area as a control. And other potential confounding variables were factored out, and the results showed that the death rates from leukemia, lymph node cancer, and nervous system tumors in high current homes were more than double the low current counterpart. So once again, similar to what I said regarding the current potentially inducing or stimulating tumor growth, this proves that. This proves it very clearly. And in Stockholm, they actually repeated these studies, and they were able to correlate childhood leukemia with actual measurements of electromagnetic fields, which even further proves this. Another concern, and this one's fucked up, is in Russia, which was the Soviet Union at the time, they took this subject a lot more seriously than we did over here in the United States. We kind of thought of it as woo-woo, because of the dogma. Like I was saying before, we didn't take it seriously. And over there they did. And with what they found out, they actually used it as a weapon against us, against the employees or the ambassadors and employees for that matter, but at the United States Embassy in Moscow. So they targeted not extremely low frequency waves, but microwaves at the embassy building in Moscow at the specific floor that, the US was on. And 3 of our ambassadors had drastic consequences. 2 of them died of cancer. 1 of them developed leukemia-like symptoms. And these are all known hallmarks of microwave radiation exposure. And they did that. It's like, I don't know, it's an early prototype of electromagnetic weapons. And it's just crazy that, even at that time it wasn't taken seriously, but here's another country employing it against us. And it was also discovered that compared to other foreign embassy workers, all the workers, or actually, I messed up there. 1/3 of the workers from the Russian embassy had a 40% higher white blood cell count on average than the workers from other foreign embassies, which shows that it wasn't just the ambassadors that were affected. It was all the employees at least 1/3 of the employees at that location were dramatically affected by this. Russia also enacts strict safety standards regarding the exposure in fields that have to do with radar and other things like that, even for their general population, because they discovered the harms. And one of the ways that the harms were discovered specifically was with radar men. They did studies on them over there, and they had profound effects. Off the top, I forget exactly what they were, but I want to say they had to do with like birth defects in their offspring, or just less viable sperm, stuff like that. And this tracks too with mice that were exposed to different electromagnetic radiations. They documented much lower litter sizes, much more birth defects and stillbirths compared to non-exposed control groups. So it's real, it's scary, and in addition to getting people to buy the book, I want people to be aware of this, because like what I'm saying with the suicide and the birth defects and everything, like you got to be aware of this kind of stuff so you don't live near those things. Like you don't want to live near power lines. You don't want to live near a radar tower, like air traffic control tower. You don't want to live near those areas where there's going to be a lot of electromagnetic current coming towards you and that you're going to be exposed to it constantly. You should try ideally not to work in a field like that. It's going to affect you. It's inevitable. It's a fact. It's a reality. It's being ignored because the world that we live in relies so heavily on electricity, and we're not going back. So it is what it is. The best that you can do is just be aware and be prepared for your own safety, rather than potentially having a negative outcome occur in your life and you're just questioning, why did this happen to me? I'm a healthy person, blah 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 blah. And unbeknownst to you, it's something that could have been potentially avoided, but the government kept it suppressed even though they knew. And like I was saying with Becker, he testified against the government countless times, or even for the government. No. Woo! Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Not letting that happen. So, yeah, Becker, he testified, and the government brought their own counter experts who just did like bullshit studies and tried to discredit him and make him sound like he was the kook, like he was the whack job. And a lot of them fell flat because he had the real information, the real data, and they couldn't do shit. They couldn't say shit to him because he knew what he was talking about. So it just shows the government, when stuff's not convenient for them, they'll run these kind of like, what's the word? Like almost like cover, you know what I mean? To cover themselves and try and make it seem like the other people are the bad ones. And I'm not saying, you know what, I'm just leave it at that. So I want to close off with a few interesting facts from the book that kind of unrelated to both of the two sections. So first, direct current to the brain can be used as an anesthetic, and it can also be used to reverse the effects of anesthesia in a way that doesn't, leave you in that kind of drugged out stupor when you're coming down from it. And it's actually much safer than anesthesia. Anesthesia, you got to be super duper precise with the dosage, or it can be not good. So it just makes me wonder, why has this not been explored further when it seems like a very viable option? So next, cancer cells can also de-differentiate, similar to what I was talking about with the cells around broken bones. Cancer cells can go backwards too. They're not just stuck forever as cancer, mass proliferating tumors. They can go backwards. They can potentially become healthy, viable cells again. So why has that not been explored further? Another interesting fact, bones are piezoelectric, which means they turn mechanical stress, which is compression or bending, into electric energy, which I found that crazy. Interesting. I don't know necessarily what it does with that electrical energy, but yeah. And bones are also fluorescent. So under the right light, if they're exposed to the proper light, a bone will glow. and also regarding bones, they're mainly made up of collagen and apatite. I don't know if I'm saying that second one right. And the collagen forms kind of like a grid structure, and the apatite a lattice grid, whatever. And the apatite pieces form in the gaps of the lattice, but they're held in place there by copper. So one of the things that Becker suggested is the potentially osteoporosis occurs when there's not enough copper, the copper is no longer doing its job holding the apatite in place. So that's why osteoporosis starts to set in as people get older. A couple just final brief ones. Following magnetic storms, there's a significant increase in admissions to psychiatric services, showing once again how susceptible we are to these events. And finally, as I pack up my notebook here, finally, there's a lot of potential weapons and intelligence capabilities with this technology. And like I said, this is over 40 years old. So chances are it's already in use. A couple things that Becker talked about that they knew about back then is if they knew someone's heart rate, they could concentrate a frequency at their heart to basically give them a heart attack. You could use frequency to put voices in someone's head to make them think they're going crazy and hearing things when it's actually being manipulated and done to them. Or in that same respect, a covert agent, a covert operative, you could put instructions into their head that nobody else has the capability to hear. And another example that has been used, China used a weapon like this, not like the one I just talked about, but electromagnetic weapons against India, where Indians were trying to come over the Himalayan mountains, and China just turned the whole area into like a microwave oven and forced them to turn around or just start getting cooked alive. So this stuff is being used, it's real, and this is old information. So anyway, that's my summary. I apologize because this was a little janky of a video today with the wind continuously blowing over my stand. I wanted to get out and have a different setting, but I don't know if that made it better or worse. So anyway, The Body Electric by Robert Becker, MD. Go grab a copy and you will not be disappointed. It was fascinating, compelling, mind-blowing, and also somewhat disheartening because it's old information and it just proves that Max Planck was unequivocally correct. Science advances one funeral at a time. So that's what I got for you today. Stay warm out there. Thank you.